Propaganda is defined as follows: ideas, facts, or allegations spread deliberately to further one's cause or to damage an opposing cause. Nowadays we might associate propaganda with wartime movies or the radio, but obviously the method has been around for much longer. It is said that as long as there have been rulers, there has been propaganda. Before the printing press, propaganda was transmitted directly from the sender to the receiver, by word of mouth. The message could only be effectively transmitted to a large, assembled audience. You'd have everything from poets to town criers, even priests sharing political news during their sermons. The printing press, invented by Johannes Guthenberg, revolutionized the spread of information. Suddenly you could reach out to a much bigger audience by giving them written materials that could be read anywhere, at any time. The printing press was vital for the spread of Protestantism, for example. There was an issue. Most people couldn't read. Luckily, it wasn't that big of a deal, since only a single literate was needed to read a text out loud to a congregation of any size. This could be anyone that could read and pick up the paper. Reading in groups was even common in the upper classes. Someone in the family would read out while the others listened and went about their business, usually some handiwork. There were also book clubs, where only a single person read out loud while the others sat and listened. The 1600s saw the rise of popular literature, which targeted an illiterate populace, and was meant to be read out loud by certain narrators. This system was used feverishly during the 30 Years' War. Just a quick rundown what the 30 Years' War was. Before World War II, it was the most devastating conflict in Europe. Habsburg Austria, France, Spain, and Sweden all decided to duke it out across Germany, devastating the local populations. Germany at the time had a population of around 20 million, and the total dead ranked between 4.5 to 8 million, most of these being civilian casualties. Originally, the war was fought over religious reasons, the rights of Protestants to freely practice their religion within Germany. However, it eventually devolved into a power struggle between France and Austria, with the Germans as unfortunate victims of a crossfire. During the 30 Years' War, written propaganda saw its breakthrough in history. Pamphlets, newspapers, mass print, every medium was exploited in the attempts to glorify your own side and assassinate the enemy. One French bureaucrat wrote that a ruler must acquire skilled authors and let them write anonymous flypapers, manifests, articulate defenses, and declarations of various sort, all to lead the people where he so desires. Propaganda was viewed differently back then. No one questioned the ruler's right of censorship. The truth was the truth, and it was the ruler's obligation to convey the truth. Censorship was simply a method to cut away false information. Another difference lies in the conception of human psychology. Modern propaganda is based on the idea that humans can be manipulated, and that their opinions can be changed by appealing to emotions. But during the 1600s, man was seen as basically unchangeable. Propaganda could only win hearts and minds by arguing and convincing. There were three main categories of propaganda. The first category includes writings of shorter or longer length, with a political, constitutional, or denominational message. These were usually titled as manifests. For example, during the siege of Magdeburg, the Count of Tilly delivered a manifest to the city defenders, giving them the choice of surrender or total destruction. After Gustavus Adolphus was unable to rescue the city, he issued manifests explaining his actions. Manifests were primarily directed towards rulers and the politically active, and didn't appeal to the masses whatsoever. They usually used lengthy references to historical or even fictional events that legitimized modern political decisions. For example, the end of the 30 Years' War was compared to the end of the biblical deluge. Another category were relations, meaning descriptions of events such as battles on sea or land. They were a sort of news outlet that allowed the publisher to portray the events to his liking, positive for his side and negative for the opposition. The third category were flyers. They had short contents and contained a lot of subgroups and were directed to the common people. Songs were important for spreading propaganda. Lyrics were printed on a flyer along with a well-known melody you were supposed to sing them with. In 1631, around 70 different songs were spread through flyers in Germany. Most of them concerned the sack of Magdeburg, such as O Magdeburg, du schöne Stadt, which you were supposed to sing to the melody of An Wasserfließen Babylon, a Lutheran hymn from the 1500s. Flyers typically contain a picture, usually allegorical. For example, the Habsburg Emperor was often portrayed as an eagle, and the King of Sweden as a lion or bear. In this picture, the King of Sweden and the Prince of Brandenburg-Prussia walk in front of an apothecary, containing the necessary medicines to cure the Habsburg menace. As you might see, these medicines are weaponry. They kill people. These medicines are given another life in this German picture, showing the Swedes as warmongering. Opponents were always accused of the worst things imaginable. Both the Habsburg Emperor, the King of France, and the King of Sweden were accused of wanting to conquer the world. In this English propaganda picture, we see Catholic Irishmen murdering Protestants. And in this one, the Irishmen even murder a baby. These are, of course, 100% accurate, to a T, and the English would never do anything remotely as bad. I also wanted to include this picture of someone pouring urine down another guy's throat. It's seriously the funniest thing I've seen. Every side portrayed themselves as the peak of civilization. For example, Sweden claimed that Swedish was the root of all languages, and that the runic alphabet was older than the evil Latin alphabet, which had been forced upon them by the Pope. Sweden took its nationalism and propaganda to an entirely new level, which I'll have to feature in its own separate video. Both sides naturally said that they were guided by God, and that every right-minded person was on their side. The enemy were portrayed as child killers, rapists, robbers, arsonists, and every other crime in the book. Scottish people were seen as barbarians, so the Swedes were equally barbaric when they resorted to hiring Scottish mercenaries. Throughout the century, Swedes were portrayed as warlike and incapable of peace, which was kinda true. The Germans said that Swedes were like hungry wolves, looking for booty for their cold and poor country. A Dutch piece called the Swedish Mirror from 1653 said that 30 years ago, the Swede had been so unknown that you could make money by showing him off at the theatre. He always smelled because he carried a box of food from home. Back then the royal court didn't have a single silver bowl, but now they were rolling in riches plundered from the German war. Again, this was kinda true. The propaganda was published in multiple languages and signed anonymously by a mysterious character such as a courier or a noble cavalier. However, they were always produced by government chancelleries. For example, the Swedish chief of propaganda was Chancellor Axel Oxenstierna, one of the most influential politicians in Swedish history. He is often credited for establishing Sweden as a great power. Larger overviews of the war were likewise produced. The most prominent was Theatrum Europaeum, the European theatre, a chronicle covering important events between 1618 and 1718, published in 21 bands from 1633 to 1738 by Merien in Frankfurt am Main. It was a great source of information, but not always objective. Early on it had a pro-Swedish tendency, for example. The oldest newspaper in the world was printed in Strasbourg in 1609, and the 17th century saw the rise of this medium. There was a great demand for news, especially amongst the merchant class, who needed information on the developments of the war. These newspapers flourished especially in Germany and the Netherlands. In Amsterdam, 9 different papers were published a week. But in most cities it was limited to just one, thanks to technological limitations. The information was gathered by reporters that operated directly from the front. They were possibly the first war correspondents in history. However, papers were seldom reliable. Surprise! Like most history videos on YouTube, they lacked sources. And like most history videos on YouTube, they just repeated the same shit over and over. However, the newspapers of the day lacked commentaries, and the reader had to make up his own mind over the events. News and propaganda was primarily spread through the post. It was during the war that the Swedish Postal Service was established, at the behest of Axel Oxenstierna in 1636. A postmaster would deliver post between the cities, each one having a postmaster. They had to travel 1 mile per 2 hours, and the mailman had to blow a horn to signal for the next postman to take over. Swedish postmasters were to be found across Germany as well, and they were vital for catching enemy news and propaganda. Since I'm Swedish myself, and most of my literary sources are in Swedish, it will be easiest for me if I provide examples of national propaganda from my own country. The Swedish peasantry were mostly fed their propaganda through the church. Swedes were incredibly religious, superstitious and imaginative back in those days, and were very susceptible to the words of their priest. Why would he ever lie to them? He was God's messenger, after all. The priest would read out various news, ranging from constitutional changes to developments in the war. Naturally, these news had been censored and filtrated by the cabinet office. Their goal was to keep morale high through the long decades of non-stop war. Before Sweden entered the war, their propaganda was religious in nature. Sweden's Protestant brothers in northern Germany were under threat from the Catholic emperor. As the war developed and Catholic troops were being stationed in the German coast, the propaganda shifted towards a direct threat of Habsburg invasion. This propaganda proved the most effective with the Swedish peasantry. The past 200 years had been very rough for them, with economic blockades and invasions from foreign countries. Naturally, they wanted to be protected, and the offensive war was preached as defensive. Of course, enemy spies would do their best to spread their own propaganda. It was also in the priest's duties to create a psychological defense and warn against these fake news. The propaganda intensified when Sweden entered the war. Naturally, it had to change depending on the target group. Whilst the Swedish peasants were told that the war was to protect them, the occupied Germans were told that the Swedes had come to defend their Protestant religion against Catholic oppression. Right in the middle of the 30 Years' War, in 1643, war broke out between Sweden and Denmark. This created a new situation where the enemy suddenly wasn't a religious enemy. Now both sides had to convince everyone else that they were in the right. In the Netherlands, the Swedish spread their message through a war manifest, which contained an official explanation to Sweden's politics. The message was simplified and spread to the wider populace. These types of flyers were easy to spread, especially in a country like the Netherlands, with a more liberal environment. Sweden's best arguments for starting the war was the sound toll. You see, the Danes controlled the sound between Sjælland and Scania, which every ship going in and out of the Baltic had to pass through. This meant that the Danish could impose a heavy toll and make a lot of dosh. The English and Dutch, being the greedy shits that they are, did not like this. The message was not always delivered so directly. In one allegory, a sheep was compared to a pig. When the sheep is attacked by a human, it doesn't resist, because it knows it is innocent and knows he only wants its wool. The pig, however, squeals and screams, knowing that the human wants his fat pork, which a pig has gained through gluttonous eating and drinking. The pig was meant to be the Danish,
Varning, juten har upptäckts i tråden.
whilst the sheep was the poor Dutch. These sort of flyers were read out loud, and meant to both entertain and convey their message. Another sort of propaganda were false letters, where an opponent explains their policy to a third party, thereby revealing their evil plans. For example, in one such letter, Christian IV of Denmark moans to the King of Spain how he has waited for his chance to stab the Swedes in the back after they discovered his years of scheming. These letters weren't supposed to be authentic, but rather a humorous way to emphasize your own cause for the conflict. Thanks to its experiences from the 30 Years' War, Sweden was able to produce propaganda more effectively than the Danish. The Swedish propaganda machine was aggressive and goal-oriented. Both the Dutch and the English were convinced of the benefits in breaking the Danish sound monopoly, and supported the Swedish war effort. The war ended in a Swedish victory, with major land concessions in their favor. Whilst wrapping up this video script, I discovered a blog which discussed what was possibly the first meme in history, Saxon candy. Whilst the blog is dodgy in a few places, its translations and interpretations of the pictorial evidence is good, and I'd suggest giving it a read. In those days, a type of popular marzipan was produced in the electorate of Saxony. The meme Saxon candy, or Sächsisch Konfekt, originated from a quote by the Prince of Saxony, John George. Imperial General Tilly was preemptively invading Saxony to prevent the prince from allying with the Swedes. As a response, George did just that. He allied with the Swedes. His quote read as follows: "So you're coming hither for the Saxon candy. It may contain nuts." By nuts, he meant that they would be very hard to chew. You might even break your teeth. Tilly was soundly beaten by the Swedish Saxon force at the Battle of Breitenfeld. The Protestant propaganda machine was quick to exploit the event, and the quote by George. In this picture, we see the Catholic troops having teeth problems from all the Saxon candy they've devoured. General Tilly himself has his teeth pulled out by the dentist, none other than Gustavus Adolphus. Having your teeth pulled out is a painful and humiliating process, and the author of the blog interpreted the imagery and accompanying poetry as having flares of sexual violence. This next picture is very interesting due to how eerily similar it is to modern memes and propaganda. The broadside is giving a mimetic two-word title, Sächsisch Konfekt, Saxon candy. The lyrics describe how Gustavus and Prince George had set up a table full of candy. In the picture, we see that the Swedes have names like religion, freedom, and dignity. This is identical to modern political propaganda, like this cartoon by Ben Garrison. We see US politician Donald Trump punching someone, I don't know or care who, with a pair of gloves given similar names to the Saxon Swedes. Note that I'm not taking a political stance either way here, I don't care. I only want to make a comparison between modern and historical media, to show how things barely change. Back to the Saxon candy. The feast is interrupted by General Tilly, who comes to devour all the sweets on the table. Instead, he is force-fed poisoned candy by the Swedish king. If you enjoy the content I produce, consider supporting me monetarily on Patreon. You'll find the link in the video description. Otherwise, please give the video a like and a comment, so that YouTube will show it to more potential viewers. And why not share it with a friend? Cheers.